morning, everybody, and welcome to CBI at 10. I'm Liz Mosley. I'm an editor at Tortoise Media, and it's a pleasure to be back with you. I had my COVID vaccine yesterday, so I'm feeling slightly more delicate than I would normally be at this time on a Monday morning, but certainly well enough to be here this morning for what I hope will be a really interesting and stimulating conversation about innovation as part of the kind of 1 year on series that the CBI are running. We're joined by an esteemed lineup of experts who really know what they're talking about in this space, and of course Matthew as well. Good morning, Matthew. I'm going to start with you if I can before we get into the guts of the innovation thing. Like we always do, we're going to just kind of have a bit of a catch up because we missed a week last week for other CBI events on sort of new COVID news and updates, and obviously what's happening in India, which may be affecting some members trading and traveling and what have you. So if you want to just sort of get us going with a bit of a COVID update, that would be great.
Well, Liz, thank you for that, and good morning, everyone. And I was actually going to start there just with a quick word, actually, with the sort of really worrying and difficult situation in India. We know over the course of the last year, businesses have just stepped up to help in many brilliant ways, mainly in the UK, but also around the world. And I think we are hearing just literally over this weekend, there is a sort of desperate need for oxygen cylinders, the concentrators, the generator plants, and so on. If there are businesses out there who think you might be able to help in this space, then please do just drop us a line. We can connect you up to the Indian High Commission. We're in good contact with them and a number of businesses who are already helping. But look, if there are companies who can help, we're absolutely keen to do whatever we can to make that situation a little bit better. I guess back in the UK, just the update. I mean, we're now probably around about halfway through the government's reopening roadmap. I think all eyes are on the 17th of May, which is the next sort of landmark and step on the way for things like indoor hospitality, the accommodation in hotels, indoor entertainments, museums, cinemas, and so on. And I think we're looking really positively towards that date. Before then, I think quite a bit still on the go. Just to run through a few of those. I think firstly that the social distancing review, look, the roadmap has just been super helpful for businesses all the way through to really help them with business planning. And my sense is now this sort of outcome of the social distancing review is really critical now for firms to really help them with their next step of their planning, whether it be around what it means for capacity in venues or just simple things like office space and capacity and so on. Plenty of firms are saying to us, look, just useful to know where this is heading. We know that making adjustments of that nature are actually quite expensive. We had that experience when it went from 2 meters to the 1 meter plus rule and so on. So in an ideal world, they'd like it stable, and even better, they'd like it gone if it is safe to do so. But that sense of a little bit of clarity is something we're pushing with government. We do believe this is turning into quite a bit of an all-encompassing review in some respects. So it will cover the distancing, but it also touches and wraps on the future of the sort of COVID secure working guidance, guidance clearly for continuing to work from home where possible, the role of COVID secure certification, and so on. All roads lead to Rome a little bit in this review a little bit. So we're pushing for detail there. And I think the message to the government is actually, could you show your hand a little bit? Clearly, you're not going to reveal the outcome until you're in a position to be able to do that. But show a little bit more about the sort of the data and the scenarios that you're weighing up. What information have you got? What more information would be useful, and so on, so we can get across a sense of where that is progressing towards. Away from social distancing, a few other bits just to mention. I mean, look, just by looking at the sort of the member chat and the conversations and the queries that are coming in, I think sort of pretty much every company in the land is grappling with the ins and outs and details of hybrid working at the moment. We've got plenty to help companies with that, but I think they're thinking through just the HR aspects, the tech about how you make hybrid working as opposed to 100% remote, for example. What are the office configurations people are going to need to be thinking about in the future? So there's plenty of work going on that. We've got guides and virtual rooms that people can learn from what else others are doing on that. So do get in touch on that front. And then a few final bits on other COVID matters. Look, I think we're getting a few questions in around testing and clarity around testing because, victim of success in many respects. We've now got workplace testing, home-based testing, community-based testing, and so on. So a few firms are saying, no, look, which one should we go with? What should we do? And the steer so far from the Department of Health and the test and trace team and so on is that use whichever route works best for you. And that is the message that's okay to do. So please again get in touch, but work through what suits you as the answer there. And then we're also finally, there's just pushing a little bit on scenario planning. So depending on where the outcome of overall reviews get to, will the government be able to say, look, if it leads in this direction, this is what we're going to do, and this is what this will happen to the sort of support and so on, so that we don't get into that situation where we're playing catch up in future. And finally, we're just continuing to push quite a bit on some of the sectors most in need of help. Aviation, for example, where the costs of testing, going with PCR as opposed to lateral flow, is quite an issue. Universities very keen to be able to get students, particularly final year students, back as soon as possible. So continuing to understand the situations around those key sectors. So that's where we are on broad COVID matters.
Thanks ever so much, Matthew. Massively useful, and a lot still happening. Just a couple of follow-up points. I can see somebody in the chat has asked for a contact email, perhaps of someone at the CBI, if they're interested and want to get involved with India. So I think Alice will probably post the right place for anybody to make it easy for them to go to the right person at the CBI in relation to helping out with India. And thank you so much if you're in a position to do that. That's amazing. And then the other thing is on the social distancing review, as you say, we kind of want the government to sort of trail a little bit about the context and the work that's going on behind the scenes. Do we have a date for the sort of grand reveal of that, or is it just a sort of when we're ready situation?
Well, the language that's in the roadmap is that, you know, that review will be conducted and will conclude in advance of the 21st of June step on the road. That clearly is a fairly broad parameters. So, but that is the sort of ultimate deadline, essentially.
Okay. Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Matthew. Now, sort of to the topic at hand for this morning around innovation, I mean, a lot of organisations, and we've already just been talking about it, have been compelled to innovate in all sorts of ways that they perhaps would rather have not had to bother in order to just simply survive. But the ongoing innovation, the requirement for innovation, and the opportunities that have been created are sort of really significant. And although I'm sure business are feeling sort of fairly exhausted after the year that we've had, the sort of the requirement to keep going and keep leaning into this is very much there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Liz, absolutely. I mean, I think we'll get stuck into that, but just a few thoughts from me to sort of kick that off. I mean, firstly, to your point, I mean, I think, look, in the last year, we've just seen what's possible. So in a sense, if we can be this innovative, can we lock in some of those behaviors, including around collaboration, including, by the way, between business and government and so on. But the number of companies who've said to me, look, we have changed and done in weeks what previously would have been sort of 3 or 5 years to get done, sort of thing. So just that rate of change, ability to do things differently, adapt products and services and so on, if we can lock in some of that really highly innovative and agile behavior, I think that would be great. So that's sort of thought number one. Second thought for me would be just there is this real sort of both growth and investment paradox almost sort of thing. You know, Felicity will wax lyrical about this, but we know we've got really strong evidence and examples of companies that are more innovative, who invest more highly in research and development, are the adopters of tech, digital, AI, and so on. All of those have got a terrific track record of higher levels of performance, of profitability, revenue growth, and so on. So there's plenty of upside doing that. But of course, as well as the question, where's growth coming from, companies are also simultaneously scratching their heads with where's the money for that investment coming from if we know we need to do stuff. So how do we get into a virtuous circle on some of those issues would be really helpful. And then my sort of third and final thought would be just this overriding commitment to build back better. Companies pull us up on so much and challenge us on if we don't mention it. So I get ahead of the game here. But these ideas about sort of shared growth around inclusion and green development, mental, you know, so much of this innovation plays a big part. I might even venture to say it's perhaps the biggest single enabler of all of this change and behavior change that's going to come. So if we can really focus on it, it really does stand us in good stead for a decade of growth ahead.
Thanks ever so much, Matthew, and that's a brilliant way for me to segue into talking to Felicity. Good morning, Felicity. Now, you've got the innovation brief at the CBI. You sort of hold the sort of crucible of this. We're talking about innovation as though we all understand what we mean, and I wonder if perhaps it might be worth just a couple of sentences on what is it that we're talking about. Is it as simple as just doing things you haven't done before?
I mean, it's a great question, and quite honestly, Liz, it's one to which I feel the answer evolves almost every day that I'm in the job. But I typically characterize innovation as being two things. Firstly, it is something new. But that doesn't necessarily mean something new to the world. So it doesn't necessarily mean developing a new vaccine, though it could be. It could be, as you say, just trying something that you haven't done before. But I think there is a quite critical second part to what innovation is. And it's not something that's new for the sake of it. It's something new that adds value. And it can add value in all sorts of different ways. It can add value to your business's bottom line. It can add value to your customers. It can add value to your wider community. There are really a lot of ways in which you can kind of connect that dot there. But I think that that's what's really different about innovation from, say, invention, is that there's a clear sort of purpose behind it. And I think what's been really exciting during the crisis in many ways is just seeing the number of ways that people have innovated and demonstrated that innovation is for everyone. It's not just about people in sort of white coats in labs, although clearly it is some of that, and some of that has absolutely been life-saving during the crisis. But it is all sorts of different things. And for me, I really characterize what I've seen amongst our membership as sort of falling into two categories. So the first around helping out, and the second around figuring it out. And on helping it out, I mean, honestly, I was astonished at the speed of response from businesses at the start of the crisis. The number of companies that we had getting in touch, saying that they wanted to help us with PPE production, how quickly the high value manufacturing catapult managed to pull together a number of manufacturers to divert production onto ventilators, looking at our gin manufacturers suddenly moving to producing hand sanitizers, the pace and the creativity that we saw in companies wanting to step up, and just how quickly people have already responded on the chat here, saying yes, we would like to help out in India. We can see there's a crisis over there. Our business could do something here. And I think this really told quite an incredible story about what business can do in the crisis and the role that business plays in society. And I know that Juliet and Brian have examples of where businesses that they're working with and their own businesses have stepped up to help people out during the crisis as well. And then the second one, on figuring it out, which I guess is the one that every single business has had to do. And I mean this quite broadly. It's coming up with new products, new services, so they can continue to deliver in the crisis. And we saw there that something like 1 in 5 companies introduced some new form of service just in the first 3 months of the crisis. I suspect that has increased since then. And everyone saw it on their high streets. This is such an incredible time to see this innovation really live. There were cafes that almost straight away started selling through open windows and quite quickly moved on to having delivery services, businesses that never before had a website, not only having a website, but working with other platforms to start selling more directly to their customers. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about the sharing economy later, but one of the things that I saw that was really exciting was Airbnb developed out online experiences, so totally new digital products. So you couldn't travel, but you could still learn new things and spend time with new people. And it's not just on product. I think we've seen lots of businesses look at how they operate themselves, certainly in the service sector, but I think for anyone who's been office-based, digital processes have become completely fundamental. And so many members have said things to me along the lines of, we are light years ahead of where we were at the start of the crisis in terms of digitization. Collaboration software. A little over a year ago today, most of us on this call did not know what Zoom was.
Yeah.
Now we know Zoom, we know Teams, we know WebEx. We're using all of them. We're using them really fluently, and this is a big step up in digital capability. And what I think is really exciting there is, obviously many of us also at the start of the crisis were looking for new ways to exercise, and I think this is a really interesting parallel. We might have started out with the Joe Wicks videos and got fitter over time, and now gyms are starting to reopen. We're thinking, maybe I want to do more strength training. Maybe I want to try something harder because I've got fitter. And in some ways, businesses are in the same place. Ones who didn't really innovate, didn't see themselves as innovative or digital before the crisis, have really evolved throughout the crisis. And it's a question of, I've flexed those muscles now. Do I want to keep doing it? And it's makes this a really critical moment because, as Matthew said, Many businesses have run out of cash. They've been investing in being COVID secure. They've been investing in keeping their people going and their mental health and just all of the day-to-day stuff that comes with running a business at a time in many sectors of low demand. And also dealing with workforces that are often feeling sort of more strained, more remote. So it's a very difficult time for businesses to keep that innovation going. So I think, you know, lots and lots of opportunities out there, and a really sort of inspiring time from the business community. But I think the big question is kind of where things go now.
That's fascinating, Felicity, this idea that businesses have been emboldened to do more and more different things and less comfortable with what you might call the status quo because they've been sort of compelled to adapt in some way, shape or form. I'm going to come to Brian now. Brian Palmer, you're the Chief Executive of Tharsis. Just before we get into the questions, Brian, would you just do a sort of really quick idiot's guide to what your organisation is and what it does?
So Tharsis designs and manufactures advanced machines and robots. Generally, we talk about strategic machines. So those are machines that, you know, add value to a customer proposition and not just about removing labour. So I think, you know, lines up with what Felicity was saying about good innovation. So as well as being new, it's got to add value, and that's not just about trying to become slightly more efficient and remove people.
So how has this, you're an organisation that, I mean, even just the sentence sounds innovative, you know, advanced machines and robots. It could scarcely be more innovative when you say robots. But Brian, you sort of work with customers and clients to help them to innovate better as well. So you're sort of working sort of right across the spectrum, I suppose, of what we might consider innovation support. How has the pandemic in particular affected your business and the way you do things and the way you come at the challenges that you're trying to help your customers with?
So I think that the one big thing we've seen in the pandemic, and I think, you know, Matthew touched on it, was the sort of the impact of having a really clear purpose on how quickly you can respond as a business. You can delegate, you can bring multiple businesses together in a truly collaborative manner. So at the start of the pandemic, in fact, I rang Felicity up and said, we need some problem statements. There's lots of people diving into the ventilator challenge. We want to do our bit. You know, we don't just want to be a victim. We wanted to sort of fight back. And we ended up developing a social distancing device called Bump. But you know, when we look back at that, we took it to market in under 3 months. And that's all of the sort of the hardware, you know, PCBs, the firmware, and the sort of data back end. But you know, we're working with a team in New Zealand, so our digital team handed over at 8 o'clock at night to the Kiwis, and they handed back at 8 o'clock the following morning. And so I think that the big impact from the pandemic, I think that we've got to really try and work out how we take forward. I say work out because it's not easy. You know, as a business, we're very clear on what our purpose is all about. Tech that matters, you know, creating tech that does, yeah, it matters to the community, it matters to the country, it matters to lots of people, because creating tech in the UK creates really deep roots. You know, it creates a lot of, you know, it helps with education. You know, so it's a good thing to be doing. As a business, we're now trying to get really clear on the purpose of an individual project. So we used to say we started with the idea, then we went into the boil down the needs of that initial product, you know, the minimum viable product. We then once you've got the needs, you experiment, you know, you try things out, you fail fast and hard, and you then create a detailed specification. You then get into the detailed design, and that's sort of how we operate as a business, and that's what's made us successful. The thing that we've changed post-pandemic is, instead of starting with an idea, you've got to start with purpose. And if you can start with really clear purpose, it means we can collaborate with our customers, but also our suppliers, because at the end of the day, we're integrators. You know, we rely on a huge supply base to bring us technology.
Brian, I'm interested in, we've mentioned a couple of sort of well-known examples, if you like, the way that businesses stepped up and said, well, I'm at the moment manufacturing this bit of a car, but I think I can help you with the ventilators, and those sorts of ways of innovating. You've just mentioned Bump, the piece of kit that you invented to sort of help people with social distancing. With that eye to what you've just said about purpose, what do you think, as the pandemic hopefully sort of exit stage left and becomes a little bit more of a rear view mirror thing, at least in the terms of the immediate sort of pinch point of the pandemic? What are some of the new sort of, what's the point, you know, what's going to be the focus of the innovation briefs that are going to be coming your way?
So I was talking to a group of students at Manchester University last week, and I was saying, this is, you know, it's either a challenging time to be coming out of university, or it's a really exciting time. And I think as an engineer, and clearly innovation happens right across business models and the like, but engineer, you know, we're at a time of change, and as an engineer, you know, I think there's some fabulous opportunity. You know, there's going to be some fabulous career opportunities, and I think by next year, hopefully, the pandemic's in the rearview mirror to a certain extent, or is under a level of control, and climate change will be back, you know, front and center on most people's agendas. And if you look at what we've got to achieve as a, well, as a, yeah, I mean, it's the whole, yeah, the human race, that is going to require hugely innovative pivots in a lot of business models, or how we think about energy. You know, a lot of service provisions got to change in order to make it far more, you know, environmentally friendly. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in business, especially if you're prepared to innovate, and, you know, if you're prepared to change your business model to match the new challenges that are coming.
Brilliant, Brian. Do you know, it's almost like we planned it, because Brian has just talked about business models, and now I'm going to come to Juliet. Juliet Eccleston, thank you so much for being here this morning. Now, you wear two hats, as for the purpose of this conversation, both are relevant, as chair of the Sharing Economy UK, and also as a founder of Any Good, which is a sharing economy recruitment business. Have I characterised that in a
yes,
decent
that's
way?
about right.
Let's take the we'll come on to talk more generally about the sharing economy in a second. But I was fascinated when I found out a little bit more about your business. So it's easy for me as an ordinary punter, if you like, to imagine the sharing economy and think, well, I know I'm participating in the sharing economy when I do, you know, Zipcar, or when I do Airbnb. I can kind of, those things are sort of easy for me to imagine. But yours is a business to business sharing economy thing, and it's harder for me to think, well, what can I share as a business? How does that work?
Yeah, and it's definitely a growing sector from a B2B perspective. My platform is a platform where professionals recommend other professionals for roles. So organisations share roles with us, and people use as we say in the sharing economy, it's really utilising underutilised resources, and all of our networks are underutilised resources. We all know so many people. We're all far more connected than we ever were. And we can recommend great people for roles, and there's, you know, sort of ways of doing that means that we can make it so that it's much more of an equitable process as well, in ensuring that we have a diverse network of people that we start with. And so I do think that that's where the significant opportunity is, and especially since over the last year, not only people have been sharing more, but businesses have been sharing and collaborating much more. And as you mentioned about that status quo being changed, it's really an opportunity now for that to be bottled, and for us to start to move from where we are now rather than from where we were a year ago. But think about all of the new connections that we've made, and the partnerships and the collaborations that have been built, and think about how we make an actual choice about what the re-emergence is going to be like for a business, as well as for us personally.
In terms of business model, when we were talking before the session started, I did have a bit of an aha moment that there will be potentially CBI members and organisations watching the webinar this morning who at the moment don't think of themselves as being part of the sharing economy, and don't think that they've really got a play to be made in that space, but who are also thinking, what am I going to do with my office? What am I going to do with my unused vehicles? Or, you know, things that have changed fundamentally about the way they're doing business. And maybe they're thinking in terms of those things as either waste or savings, but actually they can be revenue too. And that's where the really interesting business model thinking comes in.
It really is, and we've certainly been speaking to a lot of the employers that we work with, because employers that work with us are already sort of recognizing that they're using recruitment differently. They're starting to think, well, we're doing this differently, and actually I use Airbnb, or I use Borrow My Doggy, or use car share. So if people are sharing their cars, then how can that happen from a carpooling perspective? How can it happen from a machinery perspective? What resources do organisations have that they're not utilising fully? And if they're not utilising them fully, who else could be utilising them? Or are there organisations that require resources that they could borrow from another organisation rather than buy in? And it's really all around that that utilisation of resources. And we often talk in sort of on the CBI webinars around productivity. And I feel as if from a sharing economy perspective, more of the B2C, sort of the Airbnb and the utilising clothing better and cars better, we're sort of nailing the personal productivity a bit better, but the business productivity could be targeted from a sharing perspective as well.
Who in the organisation whose job is it to think about this stuff? Like, where does the sort of burden of innovation around business models sit? Because does it live in the finance team? Is it the marketing person? I can't imagine.
I mean, from where I've seen, it's gone across. It's gone very broadly across the organisation, as each of the sort of departments within an organisation has recognised its own place and its own how it could do things differently. So certainly finance, I would say, in terms of where are the significant costs and where could they be challenged. Obviously, over the last year, costs have been a massive focus, and organisations are now emerging and thinking, do we need all of this office space? Many of those organisations may have office space that they do need to keep for a period of time. So how could that be utilised better? The same with sort of logistics and empty trucks. What are the volumes of empty journeys that are happening where they could be utilised better? And the same obviously with HR and recruitment. And then you could look at all of the other areas, and there's, I could, in terms of, as I say, office space, machinery, even technology equipment, all of those kinds of things can be looked at through a slightly different lens now that we have the opportunity to take stock and think, how do we want to move forward as a business, and make some changes so that we move forward from where we are now.
If you think about with your hat on representing the sharing economy platforms, which is the sort of body of members in your industry organisation that you look after, how have they fared in general? Can you say in general how have they done over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many businesses, it's been a challenge. Certainly for us, recruitment certainly has been a challenge over the last year with the volumes of unemployment and redundancies. And the same for a lot of platforms, like, as you mentioned, Airbnb, car sharing platforms, those kinds of things. But at the same time, within all of this, often we're startups, a lot of us, and so we're used to sort of having to change significantly, and as Brian was saying, consider what's our purpose at this moment in time and be very focused, but at the same time fluid with that. And so I think a lot of sharing platforms have been launched because they're, and I know Tony talks about this a lot, about being in service of the nation. And a lot of sharing platforms come from that purpose, and they start because they see something wrong and they want to disrupt an industry and make it better. And so what we see an awful lot is that over this past year, sharing economy platforms have responded well to that, in that they've obviously reduced their costs like a lot of platforms have, but they've also thought, how can we help with the pandemic? From Airbnb, as Felicity mentioned, doing experiences, but we've also had our car sharing platforms ensuring that key workers have got cars that they can use. We worked with the CBI on the redeployment of labour and helped with employers recommending people who'd been made redundant for roles through our platform. TaskRabbit had Tasks for Good, and so all of these platforms were ensuring that there was significant engagement still, so that as the market re-emerges, that engagement is still there and we can move forwards based on that.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Julia. I'm going to come back to Felicity now, if I may, because it wouldn't be a proper CBI webinar unless we had a bit of a go at policy. There's obviously a lot of opportunity here, as well as the threat stuff and the challenges around trading, for not just organisations in the sharing economy, for all organisations around innovation. And as Matthew said, it's a sort of really critical, if not the most critical component of the recovery going in the direction we want it to go in, both in terms of sustainability and speed and all of that good stuff. Where are we at in terms of particularly government policy in relation to supporting innovation, and what are we asking for?
Well, so the good news is that innovation is clearly one of the government's priorities. They've talked a lot about the UK being a science superpower, and BEIS is currently developing a innovation strategy as we speak. Government's also moved quite quickly on a couple of issues that we thought were really important. So I talked a little bit earlier about some of the challenges that businesses who've started to innovate might be experiencing around sort of cash and capacity, and to a certain extent for some businesses, especially smaller ones, there may also be a bit of a capability issue in terms of sort of the broader set of management skills that you might want for innovation. So the government has launched a scheme for SMEs called Help to Grow. There are two parts of it. One is around helping businesses directly to access technology. So currently there are 3 technologies included. It's CRM, e-commerce and accounting technologies. We hope that widens out. We think it would be better if it widened out, because we know lots of businesses might have already invested in those, and we want them to be able to make the best possible choice for their business. There's also the Help to Grow management scheme, which is quite heavily discounted access to management training, and exactly the kind of management training that can help businesses to innovate. If companies want to get involved in that, if they're interested, I'd really encourage them to register on the government page, which is helptogrow.campaign.gov.uk. And they'll be sort of signed up to get information as it continues. But we are also working at CBI with government and with Be the Business to help ensure that the design of this does really work for companies. The other scheme that I really ought to flag to any businesses listening: if you are developing new technology, the R&D tax credit is a hugely important scheme. Again, the government is consulting on that at the moment and potentially widening it out to include things like data, algorithms and cloud. We think that's really important. We know that increasingly businesses' innovation strategies are really focused around those things. And then, as I say, the final sort of plank of this is that BEIS is developing this innovation strategy at the moment, which we expect to be published in the summer. And we're working very closely with them on the design of that. We do have a member roundtable this week looking at sort of technologies and missions. So if that's something you'd like to sign up to, I'm sure we can put contact details in the chat for members. And that's something that we'll be working with really closely on them. But I think a big step forward for UK's sort of capability around supporting innovation by business.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Felicity. So there's plenty going on that by the sounds of things. And I should have said at the beginning, if you would like to ask a question to the panel, then please do just pop it in the questions or the chat. You can ask anonymously if you'd like to. Julia, I just wonder, there was a slight sort of, I'm not going to say it was an alarm bell quite, but when Felicity talked about the government's innovation strategy and related it to, they've talked about wanting the UK to be a sort of science superpower, if you like. But what we've already established is that innovation is much broader than that sort of, people in white coats end of innovation, important though that is. How much do you think the UK government understand, for example, the nature of the innovation that's coming out of the sharing economy and what that can contribute to its sort of goals about sustainability and waste management and all that kind of stuff?
I do think there's an underestimation of innovation and a perception of it being very science related and also technology related to a point when actually some significant innovations are coming through different business models, and yes, technology supports that and helps it, and sometimes science supports that and helps it, but actually the innovation is in people changing their behaviours and operating in a different way. And that to me is incredibly as exciting as AI and robots and everything else, in terms of people taking that leap of faith and moving into a different way of working and operating. And I think the government could definitely do more to recognise the broader sense of innovation, rather than it being very much a narrow focus on what you can actually see. It's often hard to explain different business models compared to seeing technology or the robotics that are happening, or vaccines, and often I see innovation based around those things rather than a brilliant new idea as to how to utilise office space or machinery or trucks, and I think it's just as important, and certainly something that I know we're working on, trying to get the government to be more aware of the different business models, certainly within Sharing Economy UK, and also the impact as any government does anything around tax or legislation, then the impact of those things isn't just purely on that business. It's, from a sharing economy, can be impactful on the environment. Our car sharing platforms have a massive impact on emissions in terms of commuting, the same as our clothes sharing platforms. We have I think it's something like 11 million garments that go to landfill every week, and so if you're starting to tax some of these businesses in different ways, through whatever means that is, then it has a knock-on impact in other areas. And so really we'd like to see a broader conversation about those different business models and the impact of any tax and legislation that comes through.
Fascinating, Julia. I'm going to come back to Brian. There's a question that has come in, which I think is interesting, Brian, in particular, in relation to what you said about making sure that organisations have a very crystal clear understanding of their own purpose, and your sort of hope, I guess, that the climate change agenda will sort of fill the void that the sort of immediate COVID requirement will hopefully leave behind. And Alex Murdoch asks, do you know of examples of innovation and collaboration between commercial sector organisations and what she calls, or he perhaps, civil society organisations or citizen action, I guess NGOs and other things, particularly in relation to the COVID response? You talked about being a sort of convener and an integrator in your organisations to bring together the best of all of the inputs. Have you got examples of where that's really worked in relation to innovation?
I suppose personally, to be honest, no, we haven't been involved in any projects like that. But I do know that if you look at some of the ventilator challenge teams that were formed, that really there was a lot of large corporates who normally couldn't really, who would never have been able to work together effectively, who were doing it from a public good perspective rather than a clear commercial, rather than for commercial gain. When an incredibly and the ability to delegate not just within their own organisation but across cross-organisation because of that clarity of purpose. And I think we will. I really hope that we will see some of that when it comes to climate change and some of the other big challenges that we have. That I think as we move more towards values and purpose-based business models going forward, rather than just sort of pure shareholder value, which I think has been the driver for many years, that we'll see more of that type of innovation like that will come to the fore more and more.
Brian, just while we're talking about the forthcoming innovation strategy that will come out of the government, I think, Phyllis, did you say September-ish time? Did you say when we're expecting to see it?
Summer.
Summertime. Okay, so a little bit before September. Brian, you obviously, if that innovation policy does focus on the type of work that you do, strategic machines, robots, all of that good stuff, that's all good for you. What would be your sort of hopes and ambitions? What would you hope to see in that policy?
I think the important thing that most business needs going forward is a really clear playing field and one that's quite level. So we've been through a lot of change, and I think that's really difficult for business to cope with, because if you don't know what the rule book is going to be in a few months' time, we need we need plans that have some longevity to them. It's not just a short-term planning horizon, so that you can make you can commit financial resources, human resources to innovation, knowing where you're heading for. And I think that's, well, I think every business on the call probably is crying out for, just a stable playing field and a stable rule book, so that they can, they can show the world what they can do, that they can do what they're good at. So yeah, stability is my big ask.
A bit of, like you say, a bit of consistency and stability, so that you know where you can start.
And over the medium to long term, not just a short, not just a short time frame.
Yeah, great. Thanks ever so much. I'm going to give the last word, if I may, to Felicity, as the sort of Director of Innovation for the CBI this morning. You've mentioned a number of really practical things that perhaps if people are sitting watching this morning thinking, well, I know that I have either an opportunity, or I've got a problem to solve, or I've got, a requirement for some support in terms of investment or what have you, help to grow the R&D tax credit being a couple of those. As far as the sort of CBI innovation agenda is concerned, between now perhaps and the publication of that policy, if we take that as a sort of milestone in time, what are the ways that members can interact with yourself and your team? How can people plug in? How can people ask for support? What are the sort of key steps that people could make if they're sitting there thinking, well, I feel like this is a play for me, what next?
Well, firstly, brilliant, and we'd be absolutely delighted to have members involved. Our innovation voice and our arguments with the government are stronger because of the diversity of businesses that we speak to. So even if you're thinking, I don't know if this is for me, please do reach out. Feel free to reach out to me or the team. We have a couple of working groups. Well, we have a number of working groups. One on innovation adoption, which Brian is involved with and actually really key member of. Also around R&D and AI, which Juliet is involved with and a key member of as well, and we'd love to get more members involved in those working groups. That's our kind of key mechanism for feeding into government and influencing our own views and thoughts on this absolutely critical issue for the UK. We are working very closely both with the business department, but also DCMS, who are doing a lot of thinking around sort of data and the role of data in the economy at the moment as well. It is a busy time for innovation and digital policy, and the more members can reach out and get involved, the better the representations we'll be able to put into government on your behalf.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a really sort of involving and optimistic way to start the week this morning. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much to all four of you for your time, and to everybody for joining us. There's a lot to think about. Obviously, we will keep an eye on the any clues that are coming out of the government in relation to that social distancing review, which obviously everybody's kind of on tenterhooks about. But then there's this sort of interesting moment of the publication of the innovation policy, which will come probably not long afterwards, actually, which will give us much more of a sense, I hope, of the sort of longer term roadmap. And that's it from us this morning. We are back on Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. As I always say, put the kettle on, have a cup of tea before you open your emails. Have a great day. All the best. Thanks so much.
Bye.